Okay, this is going to be a big weekly update. I'm getting some of the basic stuff out of the way first, which I normally do when I have these updates, which is first of all to talk about where I am. If you're watching the video, you may notice that where I am is under like a fake sheep's head mounted to the wall. I'm actually in a hotel in Norway. I am here for workshops and for the NDC event next week. The hotel here has just been refurbished. We last stayed here a couple of years ago. For some reason, the rooms have stuffed sheep's heads. I saw another room the other day that had a stuffed bear's head in it. That was my first room, which wasn't very good, and I had to leave because the climate control didn't work. Anywho, apparently stuffed heads on the wall is a thing. For those of you not actually watching, it is not a real sheep's head or a bear's head. It is literally one sewn out of some sort of fabric. And for reasons unbeknownst to me, the sheep is wearing glasses. Anyway, so I'm here in Norway. I came here on Friday afternoon. I did my last weekly update with Scott Helm in London. We'd just been there for the InfoSec EU conference. I did the Hall of Fame thing, got the Blogger Award, which was really, really nice. Jetted over here to Norway. Had a few days off because it was a public holiday here on Monday. And then I've just done 2 days of workshops the last 2 days, and I've just finished day one of another workshop today. This is all Hack Yourself First workshop stuff. It has been several very long days. I am enjoying a nice quiet beer now at the end of it. Plus, I'm going to need it for all the stuff I'm about to talk about. Now, speaking of workshops, I'm going to do things in a little bit of reverse order here. I posted a blog post today, Norway time, about Scott Helm's Hack Yourself First tour. So Scott, I got doing workshops for me, with me really. I mean, we do these things together. But doing my Hack Yourself First workshop, I got him starting to do those last year. So he's been doing Hack Yourself First in various spots around the world, absolutely smashing it out of the park in terms of success and feedback and demand, which has been great. So much so that we decided to do a public UK Hack Yourself First tour. So Scott is doing these workshops in Manchester, London and Glasgow later this month, June, and into July next year. I blogged about it briefly today, put some links into that. If you want to go and do Hack Yourself First in a public workshop as opposed to having him into your private organisation, all those tickets are up there for sale now. So I'm going to link through to that at the bottom of this post. We'd love to smash those sessions out with a whole heap of people because they are more fun when there's more people. Okay, that's that out of the way. The big one. Have I been pwned Project Svalbard? Apparently Svalbard is the right way to pronounce this, as I have since learned, and being here in Norway does help me with that. But let me scroll back, and I want to sort of talk about a bunch of things. In fact, I've got some notes on my iPad here, and I want to perhaps sort of go through the blog post that I wrote a couple of days ago, explain the rationale. This is going to take a little bit of time, but my blog posts do tend to be a little bit lengthy, I'm told. Mostly because I do want to dot all these I's and cross all these T's. Usually when I'm writing these blog posts, I'm thinking, what are all the things people are going to ask? And I'm trying to make sure it's already in the post so that when I ask them, I can just go, well, the answer is the thing that you just scrolled past. It's up there. So let's talk about Have I Been Pwned. Now, this was a pet project. I started this, in fact, I launched this in December 2013. I started it really only the month before. And this was after the Adobe data breach, which was October 2013, 152 million records, I think it was. 150 something. It was a lot of millions of records. Adobe data breach, I saw other data breaches as well, things like the Gawker data breach, the Stratfor data breach, and I was seeing interesting patterns. I was seeing people reusing their passwords. Like, we know people reuse their passwords, but to actually see it firsthand is always just a bit more impactful. I was seeing incidents of things like the Gawker data breach leading to spam on Twitter to sell acai berries because people had reused their passwords on Gawker and Twitter. So I was seeing the impact of data breaches. So I thought data breaches were quite an interesting thing. Now at the same time, and I didn't actually put this in the blog post, at the same time I was still in my day job at Pfizer looking after application architecture for the Asia Pac region, and I was trying to drive the organisation towards Azure. If you're American, you may say Azure. So Azure is Microsoft's cloud platform. They were really starting to launch the PaaS side of it then, so platform as a service, like spin up an application and you get like an instance of IIS, or spin up an instance of a database and they provide the platform for you. You don't manage the server. And I really wanted to push Pfizer in this direction rather than having like the traditional virtual machines where you are responsible for the virtual machine. You've got to give it TLC and everything. And in my role at the time, I was less hands-on because apparently that's what you do when you progress in your career. You do less of the development stuff and you become a manager and all these other, somewhat dirty words. And I didn't want to let go of this. I actually wanted to build stuff in anger as I was driving Pfizer towards this direction. So the data breach stuff and the wanting to build stuff all came together into Have I Been Pwned? And I've often said my rationale for building it was sort of equal parts the two. I'd like to have a data breach service, I'd like to build some stuff. And that's what became Have I Been Pwned? And in fact, a lot of Have I Been Pwned I built in a hotel room in Manila in the Philippines because I was traveling there for work, I had downtime, what else are you going to do? So Have I Been Pwned started as a very, very simple idea. And I put it out there and I thought, well, a few of my mates will use it, might be fun. And very quickly it started getting a lot of press. Now, I didn't even know at the time that there were other data breach notification services. There wasn't a lot, there was a few of them. A lot of them have since disappeared. Others have come along. Some of those have disappeared as well. And I didn't care because that wasn't my motivation. My motivation was, as I said before, I wanted to build something and I wanted to have the service. So it was kind of interesting when it started to get traction, it started to get a lot of press. And this was like January 2014 now. Very quickly it got press. And it became a really big thing. I've done a few talks recently where I show the original tweet launching Have I Been Pwned. In fact, it's in the blog post about this project Svalbard, which I'll talk more about in a moment. And I start with that tweet. It's like, hey, here's a fun idea. And then the next slide is like, and now I'm in Congress talking in front of US congressmen and congresswomen about data breaches. And it just got so weird and so big that people are like taking photos of my socks while I'm in Congress and putting my socks up there as stock photos that you can buy from Shutterstock. True story, $199 for a photo of my socks. And I look back at it and go, what a crazy, crazy ride to go from having an idea about making some data searchable through to photos of my socks on Shutterstock whilst I'm sitting in US Congress. Like that is just, I find that still hard to fathom. So it became very, very big. And anyone who's watching this and has been watching my other videos will know that. They would have seen my blog posts. There's more than 100 blog posts out there about Have I Been Pwned? Not just about data breaches, but about how I've built it, how I've scaled it, how I've dealt with massive unexpected traffic, how I've screwed some stuff up as well. Like this is the kind of stuff that happens as you build out these projects. And it's been an amazing journey for me doing this. Now, with popularity comes a lot of work. And I've just found it getting increasingly difficult to do Have I Been Pwned, to do it well, because one of my equal parts strength and failings is I have a hard time doing anything half-assed. Like if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly. That's everything from processing data breaches. I'm going to verify it. I'm going to make sure the damn thing is legitimate. I'm going to make sure that the organisation either knows about it or has a very, very good cause to have known about it, i.e. it's been in the press. I'm going to make sure I do that right. I'm going to make sure that I verify the legitimacy of it. I'm going to make sure that I do everything from get the right logo from the company through to send the right tweets from the right accounts. All of this is enormously laborious, much more so than what many people, I think it is. There are several hours, at least, on average, for every data breach out there. So that was massively burdensome. Dealing with people is massively burdensome. Dealing with all the questions that come up about everything from, I've been pwned, what does that mean? Through to, I'm trying to use the API and something's not working. Can you help me? And what I've had to do over the years, and I lament this, and I have said this publicly before, is I've had to start ignoring people. I cannot feasibly reply to all the emails I get. So there's all these people out there saying, look, for example, I have been impacted by a data breach. I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. And I literally have to put it in the file. I can't reply. I just cannot scale. So that's been hard. And then the press side of things. Now, the press side of things has been really fascinating. It's been great for me in terms of building a personal profile. I've become well known because of this. I do actually enjoy it as well. Like, I enjoy talking to people. Hopefully this comes across in the videos too. Like, I don't want to sit there in isolation and be insular. I want to engage with people, and I want to share this message about data breaches and how to protect yourself and all the rest of it. That's really demanding. Every day I'm doing interviews. I mean, last week was crazy. I did probably a dozen interviews over the space of 2 days related to the InfoSec stuff. It is really demanding. And increasingly, I was just having trouble scaling myself to support the service. Now, this was becoming particularly apparent last year, and then January this year happened. Now, January, everything kind of went a bit topsy-turvy. January, someone sent me this credential stuffing list referred to as collection number 1. And this had 773 million unique email addresses in it, over 1 billion unique email address password combinations. Oddly enough, there were, I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, over 1 billion unique combinations, over 773 million individual email addresses, but only something like 25 million unique passwords. So like, do the maths about how much password reuse there is out there and how weak they are when so many other people have the same one. But I digress. So I saw this, I loaded it in. January 17, like, this date is going to be etched in my mind forever. It took me about a week to process all this data, to get out the bits I needed. So that, just while I'm there, like, there is a week where I'm not doing a workshop, or I'm not doing something either to earn money, or quite frankly, a week where I wasn't out going for a walk on the beach, or playing with my kids, or doing something that is fulfilling for me emotionally as well. So it was very, very demanding that way. I got it out, and I was like, okay, cool, job done. I'm jumping on the airplane with my 9-year-old son because we're going to Norway and we're going to go snowboarding for a few days before I do the NDC conferences. And there's this innocent photo of me where it's like my son and I there taking a photo of the plane about to get on it, and I'm thinking everything's fine. And I get on the plane and I just start getting absolutely smashed with tweets and emails and every conceivable communication you can imagine. And we're on the plane, I go to Dubai and I open up my inbox and I get even more emails. And then I get to Oslo and I meet up with Scott Helm, who was there to go snowboarding with us, and Charlotte from the NDC conferences. And then the 4 of us are going to go to this cabin in the woods and just tune out for a few days. And I was absolutely bombarded with communications. And it was almost like a life epiphany, where on the one hand, I'm getting just drowned by people wanting to talk about this collection 1, wanting to know, can I have my password? Reporters wanting to talk, people trying to use the API and having problems. And on the other hand, we're literally in this cabin in the woods that kind of feels in the middle of nowhere, a little log cabin with a tiny little fireplace, and we're sitting around there, you know, having a chat and drinking wine. And there are these 2 things happening at the same time, which kind of made me have like this life epiphany on many different levels. One of which was that I've got to do something else with Have I Been Pwned. I can't continue to increase this workload so much. And there's a graph in the blog post that shows what the traffic looks like, the web traffic to Have I Been Pwned. And it's like, here's a year, and it goes flat like this, and then there's a little bump here, and then it goes here, and then it just goes right angle up into the sky, because suddenly there's like 10 million people on the site in a day. So it was just going absolutely nuts. And the problem is, I don't think I really put this in the blog post, the problem is, like, I'm trying to go out snowboarding and I'm thinking, I have this burning desire to keep checking my emails and my messages because I feel there's stuff happening that I don't want to miss. And it's not healthy when you just simply cannot tune out. It's really, really not good for you. So there was that bit. And the other bit was, what happens if Have I Been Pwned has gone down? What happens if there's too much traffic? What happens if there's something critical I've got to deal with? There is only me. And also, I'm out here snowboarding. What happens if I hit a tree? Scott Helm. What happens if I hit a tree or something bad happens and I'm no longer able to function? Everyone is dependent on me. And I just felt this inescapable, enormous weight. And, you know, we're there in Norway and Trysil up in the mountains, and then we came back here into Oslo for a few days and we did NDC security. Then we all headed over to London, spent a week in London doing the NDC London event as well. And during this time, I was obviously still getting smashed with all these requests and things, but I was also thinking more and more and more about what do I need to do to try and get some balance back in my life and get some stability as well. And as I got home, particularly once I got home and I was back into a sort of a familiar environment, I'd spent a huge amount of time really emotionally tormented over that and many other things that I'd had time to sort of think more about while I was away. And I sort of got to the point where I went, look, I've got to make a change to this. I can't keep doing what I'm doing. And I'm looking at my blog post here because I do want to keep a bit of chronology here too. Part of what I found as well is even just the dependencies on me to run this service day to day we're getting greater and greater, not necessarily in terms of the demand of me being available, but how much people relied on me being there. So there's a graph here of Pwned passwords. Pwned passwords is awesome. It's absolutely 100% free. I intend to keep it that way to the fullest extent possible. You can plug it into your registration, change password, login workflow to see if people are using passwords from a previous data breach. Fantastic idea, not my idea, it's NIST's idea. NIST said this is what you should do, and then Janard from Cloudflare came up with a really awesome anonymity model, so I built that into Have I Been Pwned. There's a graph in here showing it being hit 16 million times in one day. And a normal day is somewhat like 10 million. So people are hitting this, services are hitting this, and they're dependent on this being available in order for their customers to log in. Now I do say to people, like, don't make this a blocking request. Like if it doesn't respond quickly, fail fast, move on. But regardless, they're expecting this to be there to help protect their customers. And there's one guy running the whole freaking thing. So I was becoming very, very conscious of that. And one of the things I think has surprised a lot of people, and I've seen this in the feedback since I made the blog post, is that it is literally just me. I'm trying to think of how much contribution I've had, and this is not a criticism of you guys either in terms of saying you don't help me. This is how much I've actually sought out. But the amount of contribution I've sought out is extremely limited. There's something that I do want to launch in a few weeks that I've had a bit of help with from Microsoft, and that's been fantastic, and I appreciate that enormously. But pretty much everything else has just been me doing it. The data breach verification. I mean, I get that from people, and I do talk to people, and I try and get them to help me figure out whether it's legit or not. But ultimately, I'm accountable. I've got to verify it because it's going to go up there and Have I Been Pwned attached to my name. If I screw that up, I cop the outrage or whatever else it might be. I mentioned the logos before. I sourced the logos. All the communication with the media, all that sort of stuff has fallen entirely on one person. And this is whilst I'm traveling. I've been away roughly about 40% of the year, the last couple of years, trying to do workshops, trying to do conference talks, trying to do everything else. I mentioned dependencies as well. As I've said many times before, and I said again in this blog post, there are users of the service that pay money for it. For example, there are InfoSec customers who say, we're an InfoSec customer, we have a bunch of our own customers, we would like to know when their domains are breached because they're expecting us to look for their exposure. So okay, fine, there are commercial models around that. I'm dependent, or I'm responsible rather, for keeping that running because they have a very reasonable expectation that I do. And it has been. Everything's running beautifully. And one of the really key things about making this decision now is I'm making a decision to try and find a new home for Have I Been Pwned whilst there's no duress. Other than duress on my time. It'd be different if there was like someone out there going, we're going to sue you. And it's like, ah, crap, now I need lawyers and stuff like that. It's not that. It'd be different if Have I Been Pwned had been pwned and suddenly it's like I need an exit strategy. Like it's not that. It is simply that it has become so big and frankly so important, I need to do something with it. Now, this brings me to the next point here. Actually, just noticed, I put a graph in here of my tweets, and I said, I'm trying to illustrate how this year, I don't know if my behaviour changing is the right word or adapting or just having to be somewhat of a different person to what I was in previous years. But my tweets for like the couple of years or something up until January this year were averaging 1,141 tweets per month. Might seem like a lot of them are just short replies. That is now down to 315, 72% drop in tweets. My blog posts had to drop way off because I was spending so much time dealing with this stuff. So if ever anyone wanted like a quantifiable metric as to the impact on me, this is probably a good example. So I decided something had to be done. Now, over the years, there have been multiple times where organisations have reached out and said, we like Have I Been Pwned, we would like to buy this from you. And I said, look, I'm not, it's basically a pet project, there's a few commercial subscribers, it's a bit of fun, like this is not what I'm thinking about, you'll have a bit of a chat anyway. And, we've had communications and some backwards and forwards, but obviously nothing has eventuated from it. After I got home, a couple of organisations who I have a lot of respect for and who I'd been talking to already on related matters, I started having some discussions with them about, look, maybe you're the sort of organisation that should take Have I Been Pwned on board and try and help me get out of this cycle that I'm in. And those discussions started to progress pretty well. And I realised very quickly that some of the questions that were being asked, I was really ill-equipped to answer. And you can imagine the sorts of things that an organisation interested in acquiring a service like Have I Been Pwned might ask. And my reticence was things like, should I tell them this? How do I phrase it? Do I tell them precisely what's happening here, or do I talk more about potential? And I don't even know the right questions because this is not what I do. Like, I do the data breach thing and the cyber thing, and I do a good job of that, I think. But the whole thing about how do you effectively negotiate some sort of a takeover is just, I'm out of my depth. I'm totally okay to admit that. So I was in at the accountants a little while ago, and in fact I linked to a blog post in here. I talk about, I did a blog post New Year's Eve in 2018 about financial tips for developers, and one of the things I'm sure I said in that blog post was, look, I do have advisors that have been very helpful for me, and one of those I didn't name at the time was KPMG. And I went for a large multinational advisor for a number of different reasons. I see the folks there quite a bit. And I was in chatting to them earlier this year, and I said, look, we're starting to have some chats here about an organisation maybe taking Have I Been Pwned on board. I don't actually know what I'm doing. Can you help? And they said, yeah, look, we've got a big M&A department, a big mergers and acquisition department. You should go and have a chat to those guys. And those folks were based in Brisbane. So for those of you who understand Australian geography, that's about an hour drive away from me. I'm often at the airport there anyway to go different places. So we started having some chats and we clicked. The folks there are just really, really nice guys. There's a few guys in particular that I'm working with very, very closely now that I just get along with really well. And they understand the technology industry. They understood a lot about Have I Been Pwned. I'll tell you what, they understand a hell of a lot more now. And they understand the whole process of what it means to actually sell a business. Now this sort of brings us to an interesting point here, and it's certainly come up a lot in the comments, that the whole premise of, is this something that should be commercial, that you sell, or should this be something that you give away, or you make not for profit, or you hire people? One of let's actually maybe do this in reverse, so that the whole sort of idea of hiring people, I could go and do this. I can afford to pay for people to come and work for Have I Been Pwned, particularly if I actually focused on making it more commercial than what it is. I could do that, but it sounds like a lot of hard work. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm at the point where I'm feeling overwhelmed by stuff and I can never switch off. Do I really want to go out and add even more responsibility by actually having people's livelihoods in my hands? It's not something I really want to do. I really want to see Have I Been Pwned grow as a data breach service. And that is a more important objective to me than being like 100% in control of everything. So I really don't want to do the thing of either building this out and being responsible for more people, or, as the gazillions of emails I've gotten over the last few days suggest, taking VC money and then suddenly being a VC thing and being the startup of, or rather the CEO of Have I Been Pwned. I really don't want to go down that path. I don't want to go down that path for those reasons and a whole bunch of others, probably others I haven't even thought of yet. I want to try and find a place where Have I Been Pwned can slot in to some established environment that has the resources to build it into what I really want to do. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. So anyway, we were having this chat with Have I Been Pwned. Who are they? KPMG. And basically, they turned out to be a good bunch of people there. I got a heap of confidence from them that they would help me find the right home for Have I Been Pwned. Now, it's interesting when you start to go through this process, this sort of M&A process, and you look at all the different possible fits for Have I Been Pwned as a service. And it's really fascinating when you actually have to sort of step back and go, okay, so what does it actually do? Well, it's a data breach service. Okay, what else? Well, you can sign up for notifications. There are domain searches. There's some governments using it. There's a whole bunch of other things. There's a Pwned passwords. It's really interesting to sort of step back and have to say, what is this thing that you have built? And it's much harder than what it sounds like. But the bit that became really cool with that as well is we sort of started to say, okay, what could it be? What could you do with it? What would happen if the right organisation came along and they had the resources to give you people, and they had other resources that would allow you to build other things and make things bigger? And it was like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. I could do a lot. There's a lot of stuff I could do. I could process all the data that is still sitting there waiting to be processed. I could notify the organisations who've lost their data. And I tell you what, honestly, the amount of data I'm sitting on from organisations that have got absolutely no idea that they've been breached is ridiculous. I bet you it's a triple figure number. I bet you. I bet you the individuals in those data breaches is a, what's billion? 10, a 10-figure number. A heap of them. I'm probably in data breaches that are sitting there right now waiting to be processed. And I sort of started going, wow, this is amazing. Like, we could actually do a lot of stuff with this. And there are loads of different organisations that have different capabilities that work well with different parts of what Have I Been Pwned does. Some of it's very consumer-centric. Some of it's more business-centric. Some of it works well with government. Some of it works well with identity and access management. And it's really interesting when you start saying, what are all the different places it could go and all the different places that could actually help me turn this into something much more impactful than what it is at the moment. So we started having that discussion. Now, one of the things I learned as we began having these discussions, and particularly once we said, okay, look, let's do this, we're going to sign contracts and things, this is with KPMG, is they said we need a project name. So we got to refer to this by name. And apparently this is a thing in the mergers and acquisition world. This is things I have been learning of recent months. And they had some ideas which, sorry guys, weren't particularly good. So I won't even repeat some of them, but they were just a little bit too kitschy. And many people watching this probably see cyber coming out of their ears the whole time, and they know the buzzwords and they know the things that just grate when you hear them. And I was going to one meeting with them one day, and I was sitting there in the reception at KPMG waiting to see him, and I was like, I've got to come up with a good name. And I remembered the Global Seed Bank. And you might have heard of this before. You probably know what it is now because you've read my blog post. But I'd seen this thing in the news, Global Seed Bank, where all these different countries around the world can take their seeds and they put them in this bank. And it's like somewhere up in the Arctic Circle. And I knew that they used to be like mines, and there's these mines in the permafrost, and they put all their seeds in a big bucket and then they put it into the bank. And then if something sort of cataclysmic happens later on, they can go to the bank and they can get the seeds back and they can grow whatever it is they were growing before. And I thought that's a really kind of cool analogy, you know, like a whole bunch of some valuable sort of unit, and it's going to go in one place and be looked after and protected for the betterment of humanity. That maybe sounds much more altruistic than what it probably should, but you get my point. So anyway, I get on the internet and I'm looking it up, and it turns out it's a place called Svalbard. This is Svalbard. And Svalbard happens to be part of Norway. Now, it's not part of like mainland Norway, which eventually joins up to Europe. It's like take Norway and Scandinavia and then just keep going and going and going up to the Arctic Circle. And there's these islands up there. And this is Svalbard. And I thought, well, this is actually really cool on multiple levels. One is that it's a weird name, like Pwned. So Svalbard, Pwned, okay, we can work with that. The other is that I do have a really good connection with Norway. So I'm obviously in Oslo at the moment. I can see just over there the hotel I was staying at 5 years ago when I came here and did my first ever international talk. In fact, I just walked back past the Oslo Spectrum, the stadium where I did that talk. And that was an absolutely pivotal turning point in my career, where I went from doing local things to the other side of the world, doing a massive talk. I had a massively overflowing room, got 100% perfect positive feedback, and I left here feeling so good about that. But I also remember sitting in that building over there with my good mate Niall Merrigan, lamenting how much I hated my job and how much I wanted to go independent and just get away from all of this crap. And I did. The next year I did, about a year, just under a year later actually. So it was really sort of poignant for multiple reasons. And of course it was a little sort of cabin in the Norwegian snow, which I was sitting in pondering what I need to do with my life, what I need to do to try and fix this hole that I was in. So a lot of stuff started to resonate around Norway. And I remember I was sitting with KPMG, I actually called a Norwegian friend of mine. I said, look, is there anything really negative about this place? Like, there's nothing sort of absolutely terrible. It wasn't like blown up during the war and now it's all radiated or something really weird like that. And apparently not. Apparently it's okay, which is good. Someone did mention recently some of the permafrost is melting and there might be a bit of floodage. Let's just not go there. Hopefully that doesn't apply at all to the process of selling Have I Been Pwned. So we decided to call it Project Svalbard. And that was sort of, I don't know, that was kind of a major thing because now we see Svalbard everywhere. So all the communications I have, it's like Project Svalbard, Project Svalbard. So that was that. Now, moving forward, I want to not just touch on the points here in my blog post, but also talk about some of the feedback since. In the blog post, I made a bunch of commitments. And this is by no means exhaustive, but these were the things that came to mind because these were the things that I thought people would be most interested in. And one of them here is the first point here. Freely available consumer searches should remain freely available. The number one reason why Have I Been Pwned became so popular is that the searches are not just freely available, but you can do it on the front page just by entering your email address. Dead simple. You can go to Have I Been Pwned, 15 seconds later, you know where you've been pwned. Now, I've also written before as well. I wrote a blog post called The Ethics of Running a Data Breach Notification Service. And in there I talk about why it is publicly searchable, and there are heaps of really good reasons. But this is what's driven the growth of it, and this is what I want to make sure that I keep freely available to everyone. So I don't see that changing in any way. And the great thing about running an M&A process, and particularly having so many organisations interested, is that I get to choose. Like, this is my decision. I get to choose who this should go to. And I get to dictate things like this. I want to keep it freely available. Now, that's number one. Number two, I'll remain part of Have I Been Pwned. When I sort of gave this a bit of thought, there's a number of different reasons for this. One of these reasons is I am very intrinsically linked to Have I Been Pwned. My own personal brand is very intrinsically linked to it. The relationships I have with people that provide data for Have I Been Pwned is very intrinsically linked. All of this is enormously important to keep these things together. I think that if you were just to take Have I Been Pwned as a service, it would be a shadow of its former self. I just couldn't see it operating today anywhere like it does at the moment. Now, several years down the track, as we actually build this out and we make it into a bigger thing, yes, I mean, you do not want to be the single point of failure. You need to be able to make yourself redundant. That's absolutely essential, but it's going to take time to get there. So I have to go with it, and I have to make sure that not only do we get there, but that it goes in the right direction. Everyone knows how I feel about the service and data breaches and my moral compass about how I deal with this. And I want to be there to make sure that this thing absolutely positively continues to go in that direction. So that was number two. Now, number three, I said I want to build out much more capabilities. So I mentioned some of it before, and the more I've thought about it, even since writing this blog post, think about like the life cycle of data breaches. It's a whole bunch of stuff that hasn't been processed, organisations that need to learn about it. I want to make sure there's a process for those people to find out. I want to make sure that they let people know, the people who are in the data breaches, the customers that trusted them with their data, I want them to know that they were pwned in the data breach. I do want to help these organisations too. I'm sympathetic to the fact that a heap of organisations get owned by malicious criminal activity. And they are, in a way, victims. Now, in a way, they're responsible as well. Stop running that old version of vBulletin. For God's sake, patch the damn thing. But your intention wasn't to harm anyone. So I do want to help them craft their communications. I want data breaches to be something which we can process and get out to people, and for organisations to actually be able to continue on doing business as well. So that's super, super important. Then thinking about the individuals, like how do we help the individuals? Because at the moment I basically go, hey, you've been pwned, go get a password manager, good luck. And frankly, that still moved us a long way on from where it was before. I used to say, you've been pwned, just use unique passwords. At least now it's like, here's the password manager I like, you really should go and use this and it will make your life better. But that doesn't necessarily help with all the other things that people need to understand about as well. For example, your phone number and your home address got leaked, plus your marital status and your gender and your sexuality. Ashley Madison, for example. What should you do now? A lot more guidance needed there, and I still get a lot of questions from people about what should I do. Then, what can we do with that data to reduce the impact in the future? I'll give you a good example. I would love to be able to feed more of the passwords that come in from new data breaches into Pwned passwords, and instead of just waiting until there's like another 20 million passwords and every 6 months or something doing a release, what if we could do this just about daily? Just keep feeding the passwords into Pwned passwords. And then everyone that's plugging in, doing those 10 million or 16 million queries a day, they get the benefit straight away. That's the sort of stuff I really, really want to do. So that was that point. Building out more capability-wise. Now, number 4, I want to reach a much larger audience than I do at present. In total, there must have been hundreds of millions of people that have come to Have I Been Pwned, because there was like 10 million just in one day back in January, and the thing's been running 5.5 years. But that's still a very, very small portion of the internet. There's a lot more people we can reach. There are a lot of organisations out there with subscriber bases that far exceed the number of people that I've been able to reach. Now, that's not to say I think it has to go to a very large organisation with a very large subscriber base, but you can see how something like that would allow Have I Been Pwned to be much more impactful than if it went to, say, a non-profit that's trying to do good things but really doesn't have the reach. Let me diverge for a second here, because the non-profit thing has come up quite a lot. And the first thing I'll say is I'm absolutely making sure that non-profits are in scope, and when ones reach out that do actually have the capabilities that I think is needed in order to take Have I Been Pwned to where it needs to be, I connect them to the KPMG folks, and they are absolutely positively in the pool to have these discussions. I worry that whether it's them or smaller organisations, if they don't have that subscriber base, it's much harder to reach the number of people I think we need to with data breaches. Now, that's just one of many, many, many different metrics that we need to consider, but I wanted to put that out there because there are a whole bunch of different things that I need to consider in terms of where's the best place for us to go. Okay, so I was reaching a larger audience. Number 5, there's much more that can be done to change consumer behaviour. And I made the point here about credential stuffing. Credential stuffing, taking email addresses and password pairs from previous data breaches and trying them on other websites, is massive. It's rampant. It's out of control. And it only works because people reuse their passwords. If there was no password reuse, credential stuffing disappears overnight, literally disappears. Now, of course, that's not going to happen because humans are always trying to find the path of least resistance in order to do the thing that they want to do, which is get online and buy that shirt or comment on that cat video or like whatever it is. So changing human behaviour is a really hard challenge. But if we could do that, we'd make an absolutely massive dent in the impact of data breaches. So that's a really big one. Number 6, organisations can benefit a lot more from Have I Been Pwned. I would love to see organisations being able to use this data to stop things like credential stuffing attacks. And this comes back to the previous point about if we could get the data that attackers are using in order to try and mount these attacks, and we could feed that into Pwned passwords, and it feeds into those, I don't know, maybe thousands of subscribers using Pwned passwords. You don't need an account or anything. Who knows how many there are out there? If we could feed that into there and get effective protection against those credentials straight away, that would be a really, really cool thing. Last one, there should be more disclosure and more data, and I've touched on this a few times. I have way more data than what I can ever handle. That is a small slice of everything that is out there. I think there are ways where we can provide people with the right incentives, and I don't mean monetary here, but the right incentives to come forward with more data, with more breaches, incidents that have already happened and that are circulating and that are exploiting the individuals and the organisations involved. There are good ways that we can get that and we can use it for very effective purposes. So they were my 7 points here. There are more. There are many more going around inside my head. In fact, there's a bunch of ideas that have come up since I wrote this. But I made a few notes here as feedback was coming in on the Have I Been Pwned stuff, on the Svalbard stuff. And first of all, just as an overall sentiment, I am honestly blown away, absolutely blown away at how much support there has been. And trust me, I was worried. I was really, really worried about how this blog post would be received and how the premise of Have I Been Pwned finding a new home would be received. Because I could see people well and truly misinterpreting it, blowing it out of proportion, thinking that this was all a long-term plan just to cash in on the data breaches. And this is obviously not the case. So I was worried about that. But the feedback is amazing. I've been liking a bunch of stuff that's just, it's so heartfelt and generous and appreciative. And so much of it is like, wow, I didn't know it was you and you were doing this in like your spare time. You didn't know it was just you. This is amazing. So I first of all, I just really appreciate everyone that's commented very positively. I do read all those tweets. Obviously, I only reply to a fraction of them. And it is absolutely heartwarming to see that. So thank you for that. Now, one of the things to comment on here is that whether it's positive, negative, or neutral, everyone is commenting based on a 10-minute read of the blog post, a few minutes of pondering, and then projecting their view into the comments. And that's the window of what forms their opinion. And that's all they have. I understand that. What people need to understand, particularly those that are disagreeing with the approach or proposing alternatives, is that whilst you've had a good solid 20 minutes to give this some thought, I've been honestly having sleepless nights since January, and in all honesty, thinking about it very, very in depth for many, many months before that as well. So this is something that has enormous thought go into it. No one else understands all the factors that go into this decision, and there are many, many factors which are not immediately apparent. So there's a bunch of other stuff that goes into this, and I hope, if nothing else, people sort of go, look, we understand Troy enough. He's always very transparent and very honest about how he does these things. There must be damn good reasons why he's making these decisions. And I think most people can see what most of them are. So that was the first point. And it does frustrate me a bit, particularly if I see something very negative or an assumption made which is just totally off the wall. And it's like, wow, you took 20 minutes, you made that comment, and now you're off having your breakfast or doing whatever else, and I'm the one that's got to absorb it and deal with it. So there was that. Other comments that I made here, and these are a little bit random, is that, and I've sort of touched on this as well already, but I have just never been able to tune out, particularly over the last couple of years, and especially since January. It never tunes out. I try and do things like I play tennis quite a bit, and I can focus on the tennis for a couple of hours, and that's great, but it's always sort of there in the back of your mind. I was explaining how even when I was snowboarding up the mountains in January, it was really hard just to tune out. And I made the comment in here, and a number of people have picked up on this, that I frankly think I got pretty close to burning out. When I got back to Australia, I was not great. I was just feeling not so tired. I was actually feeling physically really good. In fact, in all honesty, I feel physically better this year than I have for many years because I've been much more focused on my health. Other than the beer. Life in balance. But emotionally, I was just like, wow, I'm really, really over this. Not that I was over the project. I love running Have I Been Pwned, but I was over the stress of it. So that was that. A lot of VCs reaching out. I'm getting so many emails about Project Svalbard since I posted the blog post that I cannot answer them all. Some of the ones I'm not answering are the VC ones. I don't want to take VC money. I don't want to be the CEO of Have I Been Pwned. I don't want this to turn into some venture capitalist money or company just trying to turn the whole thing into a money-making exercise. I want it to go to a place where they already genuinely in a heartfelt way, want to do good things with the data. So the VC thing, I appreciate the intentions. I'm not even going to talk about any detail there. Like, this is just totally off the wall. Now, I was about to say I'm not even going to talk about any money there. So let me talk about the money thing briefly, because this sort of comes up quite a few times and people have sort of said, how much are you going to make out of this? What's it worth? There's a really easy answer to that. I got no idea. And the reason I got no idea is that it's enormously difficult to value something that has a significant portion of the value based on brand and reputation. Now, when I was speaking to the KPMG guys, I sort of said, look, normally there's a company that runs in this industry and it has revenues of this much, and then we multiply it by that much, and then that's typically what the value is, and then they have employees and salaries and things like this. And it's like, mate, it's just me, and I've got a blog, and I'll write about it a bit, but there's an enormous amount of trust and recognition in the brand. So the money thing is, I think, those are my personal candid thoughts, I think is going to be very, very determined by the value the organisation sees in that brand. I have no idea what it is. In absolute all honesty, I've got no idea. If I was to guess, I'd be wrong by some massive order of magnitude. We'll have to see what that is, and we'll have to see if it's something that the organisation involved is willing to make public or not. I don't know the answer to that. This is new to me. This is not my day job. Like, I don't normally do this. So anyway, there's that. I've mentioned the point here, having an organisation with reach. This is important to me. Now, again, we're talking to all sorts of different companies that Have I Been Pwned could feasibly fit into. My feeling again is that there needs to be reach and there needs to be the resources to build this into the thing I want it to be. I don't necessarily want to just transfer this and end up in a place where I feel like I'm not getting the support, I'm not getting the traction, it's not getting the reach that it needs to have. And I'm going to be really conscious of that when I make the decision. Now that, for some people, may mean that they don't even like the outcome of it. They might say, look, it really would have been better if you had gone to this little non-profit here and you had sort of just sat there and done things on a shoestring. I don't think that's going to allow us to achieve the potential that the thing has. I don't think it's going to allow us to make the impact that the thing should make. Again, not ruling any of these things out. It's too early for that. But over time, we're going to have to take this massive list of people who've said that they're interested, and we're going to have to filter it down. Where is the value? So, I mean, this is one of the interesting things. It sort of spoke about the value being a lot in the brand. The value a lot is in the brand. The value is also in things like having the services available. I actually think the value in the data itself is probably a very, very small part of the whole thing. The values, and people understand Have I Been Pwned. They've got dependencies on that. It's got great relationships. I've tweeted before how a significant portion of the Fortune 500 uses Have I Been Pwned for domain searches and domain monitoring. Those relationships are really valuable. They're things we can build out. They're things that we can do a lot more with. I'd love to provide a lot more data to the organisations that were impacted by these breaches. I think about what it was like back in my corporate days when I worked in Pfizer, and we had something like 80,000 people worldwide. And I know how valuable it would have been for that organisation to understand much more about things like, let's say, the Dropbox data breach. Great example. Why do we have so many people in the organisation with cloud sync services in a non-approved non-approved service? If you're running Dropbox and Pfizer, as in many organisations, that would have been something quite concerning. So information like that is really, really valuable to organisations. Now, what else is in here? I honestly think I've just about exhausted myself trying to cover all this with enthusiasm and energy after 3 long days of training. If I think about where the negative feedback has been, it's funny that there's been very little of it. Someone pointed me to one the other day and I was like, oh, I didn't see that. I wonder why I didn't see that. Oh, that's right. I muted that guy 2 years ago because he was whinging and complaining about all sorts of things that were just totally irrelevant. So most of the time when I see negative feedback now, it's been people who've sort of had a history of just wanting to, like, proverbially kick the dog. It's the internet, this is what some people do. I've seen a bunch of comments about privacy and regulations and, of course, about GDPR. And in fact, I left a comment on my blog today in response to someone because someone said something along the lines of, this would be illegal under GDPR because you're not allowed to process anyone's data without informed consent. I was like, well, that's not actually how it works. There are actually 6 legal bases for processing data, and one of them is informed consent, and then there are 5 other ones. It's something which is a little bit hard to go into detail at the moment because lawyers are poring all over this stuff. But what I will say is that privacy regulations in different parts of the world, and Europe is one part of the world, there are other parts of the world where people's privacy is actually really important as well. This is the sort of stuff that is massively important and we are taking into consideration. And there are absolutely positively ways of running services like this and still complying with privacy regulations. This is why I will ultimately end up paying lawyers quite a bit of money beyond what I have already paid for work in this space. And this is the sort of stuff that I'll be able to talk more about as the whole thing unfolds. But the privacy side of things and the regulations in various parts of the world are enormously important and they have to be addressed. I think that is everything that comes to mind around the Svalbard side of things. At the moment, it's kind of a wild ride, if I'm honest, because you're doing the workshop things all day, getting non-stop emails and tweets. Oh my God, it feels a little bit like January again. And in the meantime, like literally trying to keep my sanity. Next week's going to be very busy. Next week's NDC Oslo. It's the biggest, busiest event of the year for me. So there's a lot of stuff coming up. The week after that, I'm in Israel for the week. I might talk about that more next week. So there's a whole bunch of stuff coming up. And I guess where I might leave the Have I Been Pwned Svalbard stuff is that I do read everything I see. I don't necessarily reply to it all. And particularly the feedback that comes to me from people that are supportive and positive and know that I'm genuinely trying to do the best possible thing I can with this service. Like a heartfelt thanks. That absolutely positively means a lot. And I see this and it does put a smile on my face. And it gives me some assurance that I'm on the right track. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so to wrap it up, as usual, I do have a blog sponsor. It's Twilio again this week. Twilio is talking about regulations like PSD2 and what they mean for your business. Also, Twilio can help you achieve secure, compliant transactions. Very often I have Twilio on my blog post promoting Authy as well, a service that I do use pretty much every day at the moment because I use the Authy soft token authenticator. So big thanks to those guys for sponsoring me. You picked a good week because I've had about 100,000 people read that blog post about Svalbard. So good luck, guys. That was a really good timing. Thank you very much for watching. I'll come to you next week. I'll try and get Scott Helm involved in the one next week as well. And we'll be able to talk a little bit about NDC Oslo and probably a little bit more about Have I Been Pwned and the whole Svalbard thing as well. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope this was a useful update.